She was just a bakery girl with nothing, no wealth, no power, just a heart full of kindness. He was a billionaire, robbed and stranded with no one to call. She paid his bus fare with her last money. And that simple act changed everything. Sit back and enjoy this powerful story of self-discovery, sacrifice, and the kind of love that begins in the most unexpected places. A love story where kindness came first, and destiny followed. The sun was almost gone. The sky had turned gray. The street outside the bakery was still busy, filled with people rushing home, horns blaring and tired faces everywhere. Inside the small bakery, Grace wiped the counter one last time. Her hands ached and her back was stiff. It had been a long day, too many customers, too many orders, and too little rest. She looked at the small wall clock. Almost 7 p.m. She untied her apron and placed it neatly behind the counter. Her co-worker, Rose, gave her a small wave from the kitchen. "You're done for the day?" Rose asked. Grace nodded with a faint smile. "I need to get home before Mama starts to worry." Rose smiled back. "Safe journey, Grace." Grace stepped outside. The evening air was warm and sticky. She reached into her small bag and pulled out her purse. She opened it slowly, already knowing what she'd see. 500 naira. That was all she had left. She sighed. It was just enough for one bus ride. No food, no backup, nothing extra. But that wasn't new. She had lived like this for months now, one small step at a time. Just her and her sick mother, doing their best to survive. Grace hugged her bag to her side and walked toward the bus stop. The road was uneven. Her black shoes were worn out. She passed a few noisy shops and street hawkers calling out prices. She ignored them all. Her mind was already on home, on Mama, on whether there was enough gari left for the night. By the time she reached the bus stop, a small crowd had gathered. People leaned against the iron poles, eyes tired, clothes sticking to their skin from the heat. Grace stood quietly in the corner. She held her purse tightly and counted the money again, twice, just to be sure. It had been a hard day, but at least she was going home. The loud rumble of an approaching bus made everyone stand straighter. As the old dusty vehicle stopped, the conductor shouted destinations. Grace was the second to get on. She handed over her fare and walked to the back. She sat by the window. Her hands rested on her lap, and she leaned her head gently against the glass. The wind came in soft and warm. Her eyes closed for a moment, just to rest. She didn't know yet that something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change her life. While Grace sat quietly at the back of the bus, somewhere else in the city, a black SUV moved slowly through traffic. Inside it sat Samuel, one of the richest young men in the country. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His suit jacket was folded beside him. His face was handsome but tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from work, but the kind that sits deep in your chest. Samuel was a billionaire, CEO of the Stoneway Group, a company he had inherited after his father died. People respected him, others feared him. Newspapers called him a business genius. But none of that made him happy. He had spent years trying to please everyone, his board members, business partners, and especially his mother. She always reminded him, "Your father would want you to protect our name." And so he did, every single day. But in the process, he forgot what it meant to live for himself. The loneliness grew with every award, every party, every handshake. He asked his driver to drop him off near a quiet intersection and run a quick errand. Samuel decided he would walk around while he waited, although he wasn't familiar with the environment. He needed fresh air, just a short walk, just to clear his head. His driver was now out of view. He turned left, then right, lost in thought, not really paying attention. And then he made a wrong turn. The street was quiet, too quiet, very unfamiliar. The buildings on both sides were half closed. It didn't feel right. But before he could turn back, it was already too late. 3 men appeared from behind a broken fence. One of them had something shiny in his hand. Another held a stick. They didn't say much. "Phone, wallet, money," one of them said sharply. Samuel froze. He raised both hands. "I don't want trouble," he said calmly. "Take what you need." In a matter of seconds, it was over. His phone was gone. His wallet too. Samuel was left standing in the middle of the road, heart pounding, shirt damp with sweat. He looked around, hoping someone had seen, but there was no one. No car, no driver, as he didn't know how to go back to the intersection where he was supposed to wait for his driver. No wallet, no phone. He stood there, quiet and stunned. For a moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. Then he took a deep breath, rubbed his face, and began to walk. The dust from the road clung to his shiny shoes. His neatly pressed shirt now had wrinkles. And for the first time in years, Samuel had no idea what to do. He reached the main road and looked around. No taxis, no one he could call. He had always fixed problems with a quick message, a tap on a screen. But now, nothing. Just then, he looked around, spotted a stop a few meters away, and slowly walked toward it. He had never taken public transport before, but today was different. Today, the bus came to another noisy stop. More people got on. Some got off. Grace sat quietly by the window, her head resting against the glass. Her eyes were half closed, but her ears stayed alert. Then she heard it. "Ah, didn't you hear me the first time? I said no money, no seat. Move aside." The bus conductor's sharp voice cut through the evening air like a knife. The noise at the front grew louder as people began to turn and look. Grace sat up and peeked over the seat in front of her. At the door stood a man, tall, neatly dressed, though a bit dusty. His white shirt was creased, and his shoes, once shiny, were now dirty with road dust. His expression was calm, but behind his eyes was clear worry. "I was robbed," the man said quietly. "They took everything. My wallet, my phone. I just need to get home." The conductor scoffed. "Every day, same story. Who do you think you're fooling? No money, no seat." People muttered. Some shook their heads. Others just stared out the window, pretending to be occupied with something. Grace kept watching. Something about the man didn't sit right with her. He didn't look like someone trying to lie, his voice soft but honest. And his eyes, they weren't begging. They were simply tired. She glanced down at her small bag. She had just enough change left for tomorrow's bus ride. That 200 naira was all she had, but something inside her moved. Tomorrow will take care of itself, she thought. Without saying a word, she stood up and walked quietly to the front. "I'll pay for him," she said softly, holding out the money. The bus went silent. The conductor paused, surprised. "You sure?" Grace nodded once. "Yes, please just let him on." Samuel turned slowly, eyes meeting hers for the first time. He looked surprised, not just by her kindness, but by how calm and sincere she seemed. "No questions, no drama, just help. You don't have to do that," he said quietly. Grace offered a small smile. "I already did. You better get in before he changes his mind." The conductor grumbled but waved Samuel in. He took a seat a few rows ahead of her. Grace returned to her spot by the window. Her heart was beating a little faster now, but she didn't regret it. She didn't even know why she did it. Maybe it was the look in his eyes. Maybe it was because she knew what it felt like to need help and have no one notice. She rested her head again and stared out into the fading light. Behind her, Samuel glanced back, just once, to look at the girl who paid for his ride. The bus moved slowly through the evening traffic. The streets were full of honking cars, rushing motorbikes, and people weaving between vehicles. But inside the bus, Samuel sat quietly, staring out the window. But his mind wasn't on the road. It was on her. He looked over his shoulder again, just once, toward the girl who had paid for his fare. She sat at the back, calm, her head leaning to the side. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't even trying to make eye contact. Most people in Samuel's world only helped when they had something to gain. But she hadn't asked for anything. No questions. No expectations. Just kindness. He kept thinking about it. Why? He tried to focus on other things, on his missing phone, whether his driver was back and looking for him, the company meetings he would miss, but his mind kept going back to her. After a while, the bus slowed down again. This time, Grace stood up and made her way to the front. Her eyes were soft, her steps steady. Samuel felt something pull at him. "Wait," he said gently. She turned slightly surprised. "Yes?" He looked at her directly. His voice was low but sincere. "Thank you. You have no idea how much you helped me today." Grace looked at him and smiled. Just a small one, honest and quiet. Everyone needs help sometimes. she said. Then she stepped off the bus. Samuel turned in his seat to watch as she disappeared into the busy street. The bus doors closed behind her with a soft hiss. He didn't even know her name. He had no way to find her. But he knew one thing for sure. He would not forget her. The bus ride ended, but Samuel's thoughts didn't. Even as he walked the long road to his mansion, dusty, tired, still shaken from the robbery, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl on the bus. He arrived home late that night. The gates opened. The security men greeted him in surprise. The house was quiet and grand as always, but it felt even emptier than usual. He stood in his living room, surrounded by polished marble, designer chairs, and silence. But all he could think about was her, the stranger who helped without knowing who he was. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. The next morning, after a cold shower and a fresh shirt, Samuel stepped out again. This time he told no one. No car, no driver. He went back to the same area. He walked past the bus stop, past the nearby shops. His eyes scanned every face, hoping to see her again. But she wasn't there. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed a small bakery nearby. The scent of fresh bread and warm sugar pulled him closer. "Let me just sit and think," he said to himself. He stepped inside. It was bright, with the soft hum of music playing in the background. A few people sat at small tables, sipping drinks. Samuel walked to the counter and froze. She was there. She was behind the counter, tying her apron, focused on setting a tray of pastries in place. For a moment he didn't move. Then slowly a smile formed on his face. He stepped forward. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, you?" He nodded. "Yeah." Grace blinked. "What are you doing here?" Samuel paused. He could tell the truth. That he came looking for her. That he hadn't stopped thinking about her. But instead, he smiled casually. "Just passing by. Thought I'd grab a cup of coffee." Grace gave a small, polite smile and reached for a mug. "You didn't have to come say thank you again," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." She set the coffee down. "I didn't do anything big." He looked at her. His voice gentle. "Still, you helped me when no one else would. Let me at least buy you coffee." Grace shook her head. "You don't have to do that." He raised an eyebrow. "Then at least let me try." She smiled faintly. "If that's how you want to settle your debt, fine." Samuel chuckled softly and picked up the coffee mug. "Have you been working here long?" he asked, pretending to be casual. 2 years, she replied. "And besides work, what do you do?" Grace glanced at him, her tone curious. "Why do you want to know?" He gave a slight smile. "Because I want to know who I owe my bus ride to." Grace leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "Oh, that's good. I was starting to worry I'd have to help you again." He laughed. "I don't doubt it, but just so you know, today I came prepared." Grace shook her head and walked away, smiling to herself. The next day, Samuel returned to the bakery. And the day after that. He always came around the same time, just before the afternoon rush. Grace noticed, but she didn't say anything at first. She simply served his coffee, smiled politely, and went back to her work. But by the 4th visit, she asked, "You don't get tired of sitting here?" Samuel looked up from his mug, amused. "Are you trying to kick me out?" Grace smiled faintly. "No, just wondering." He leaned back a little. "Maybe I like the peace here, or maybe it's the coffee." She tilted her head. "The coffee is average." "Then maybe it's the company," he replied with a small grin. She chuckled and shook her head. "By the way," he said after a pause, "I'm Samuel." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "I know." His eyebrows lifted. "Oh, you told the conductor when you were arguing about the fare, remember?" Samuel laughed. He didn't even remember that. The day had been so hectic. "Fair enough. And you are?" "Grace," she said simply. "My name is Grace." There it was. A moment. Small but warm. From that day on, things began to shift. Samuel kept coming, always sitting at the same small corner table. Grace didn't always talk, but when she did, it was honest and simple. No fake smiles, no forced laughter. He liked that. Over time, she started opening up. One slow afternoon while cleaning the counter, she asked, "So what do you do, really?" Samuel stirred his coffee gently. "I work in hospitality." "Oh," she said. "Like hotels?" Something like that, he replied, keeping it vague. He didn't want to lie, but he didn't want the truth either. Not yet. Around her, he felt like just another man, not a billionaire, not a CEO, just Samuel. And that felt peaceful. Grace nodded. I work here, obviously. He smiled. And do you like it? She shrugged. It pays the bills. But someday I want to have my own place. A bakery with my name on it. Maybe even hire people. Samuel leaned forward, interested. That's a big dream. Yeah, Grace said softly. But dreams don't cook food. He didn't respond right away. He just looked at her. There was something in her voice, a tired kind of hope. She changed the subject. So do you live nearby? Not too far, he said. Family? My mom, he replied. Just the two of us now. Grace nodded slowly. Same here. Samuel looked at her carefully. No siblings? Nope, just me and Mama. That was the first real thing she shared. And somehow it meant more than she knew. Samuel took another sip of coffee. Your mama must be proud. Grace smiled. She tries to act tough, but I know she is. They both laughed a little. And in that simple space between pastries and coffee mugs, a quiet friendship began to form. Grace still had no idea who he really was. And Samuel. He wanted to keep it that way. The days passed quietly. Samuel kept showing up at the bakery, always at the same table, always ordering the same coffee Grace had once said was just average. But it didn't matter. For him, it wasn't about the coffee. It was about the calm, the way Grace spoke without trying to impress, the way she listened, not because he was anyone special, but just because she cared. And Grace? She had grown used to seeing him too. Something about Samuel felt safe, honest. He didn't talk too much, but when he did, it made her feel seen. Not many people did that anymore. Their conversations grew longer. One day, she joked, "You know, you're like a piece of old furniture now. You're just part of this place." Samuel smiled. Comfortable, dependable, a little dusty. She laughed. Exactly. There was something between them now. Not loud, not rushed, but warm, steady. They talked about music, about food, about how the world felt like too much sometimes. He never told her who he really was, and she never asked again. But one evening, everything changed. Grace had closed the bakery late. She was walking down a quiet street nearby, carrying a small bag of flour and a bottle of malt drink. Her sandals made soft sounds on the pavement. She didn't expect to see him. But there he was. Across the road, a black Jeep pulled up. It was shiny and loud, the kind of car Grace would never even dream of sitting in. Samuel stepped out of the passenger side. He was dressed differently. No simple shirt, no quiet energy. He looked sharp, like a man who didn't just walk into places but owned them. Two men in suits stood beside him. "Make sure the guest suites are ready before Thursday," Samuel was saying, his voice calm but firm. "Tell the Lagos manager I want a final report tonight." One of the men nodded. "Yes, sir." Grace froze behind a small store sign. She watched the way they stood around him, how they waited for his orders, how they didn't move until he spoke. Then she heard it. "Stoneway Hotels can't afford a mistake on this one. Stoneway Hotels." Her heart dropped. She pulled out her phone, opened a browser and typed slowly, "Samuel Stone, Stoneway Hotels." The search results appeared instantly. Her eyes widened as she read the first headline. Samuel Stone, youngest billionaire CEO of Stoneway Group. Stoneway Group, billionaire. Samuel Stone. It was him. He had been walking into her world like it was nothing, while hiding his. Everything suddenly made sense. His calm, his quiet confidence, the way he never answered too many questions. Grace stood still, the screen still glowing in her hand. And for the first time since she met him, she didn't feel safe. She felt small. The next morning, the bakery felt different. The air was still warm, the bread still baked, the customers still came and went. But Grace's heart wasn't calm. She kept looking at the door, waiting. When Samuel finally walked in, same quiet steps, same soft smile. She didn't smile back. She stood behind the counter with her arms crossed, her eyes steady. He paused, sensing something was off. "Morning," he said gently. She didn't respond right away. Then finally her voice came out, low but firm. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Samuel froze. His smile dropped. Grace didn't blink. You own Stoneway Hotels. I saw you last night. The suits, the car, the way they called you, sir. Silence filled the space between them. Samuel lowered his eyes for a second, then looked up. I didn't lie. I just didn't say everything. Why? She asked, her voice breaking just slightly. He stepped closer. Because I didn't want you to see all that. I just wanted to be normal around you. Grace swallowed. You let me talk about struggling. You let me think we were the same. Samuel's voice was soft. Because with you I didn't feel like a name, or a company, or someone people are scared of. I just felt like a person. Grace looked away. Her chest ached. She wanted to be angry, but a part of her understood. He continued. I didn't plan to keep it from you forever. I just didn't want to lose this, what we were building. She stayed quiet for a moment, then finally said, I don't know if I can trust you. Samuel's eyes didn't leave hers. Then let me earn it. There was no big hug, no sudden smile, just a slow breath from Grace. Okay, she whispered, but don't hide from me again. He nodded. I promise. Days later, Grace agreed to meet him for lunch. But this time he chose the place. He sent a driver to pick her up. The car was black, clean, and smelled like new leather. Grace sat stiffly the whole ride. When they pulled into the tall glass building, her eyes widened. It wasn't a restaurant. It was his office. The sign said Stoneway Group Headquarters in shiny silver letters. People in suits walked in and out. Security men greeted her with polite nods. She barely nodded back. The receptionist smiled. Miss Grace, he's waiting for you upstairs. She was escorted up. Each floor looked more expensive than the last. Clean floors, art on the walls, glass doors that opened with no touch. When she finally saw Samuel again, he stood at the center of a wide office. Behind him, large windows showed the whole city. Hey, he said, walking up to her. But Grace didn't respond. She looked around, the space, the silence, the view, and suddenly, she didn't feel like she belonged. She folded her arms. I feel like I should take off my shoes. Samuel laughed lightly, but she didn't join him. I don't fit in here, she said quietly. Samuel stepped closer. Maybe not, but this place doesn't feel right without you in it. She looked at him then, really looked, and slowly, something inside her began to soften again. 3 days later, Samuel sat in his office, staring out the tall windows. The city below looked quiet, almost peaceful. But inside him, a storm was building. Things had changed. He had let someone into his quiet world. Someone who saw him as a person, not as money, not as power, not as headlines. Grace. But that peace wasn't going to last long. There was a knock on his door. Before he could answer, the door opened. His mother, Mrs. Stone, stepped in. She was dressed in her usual soft lace blouse, her jewelry perfect, her perfume light and expensive. But her expression was sharp. I heard, she said, from whispers. You've been spending time with a girl from some street bakery, a poor girl with no family name? Samuel closed his eyes briefly. He had expected this, but it still hurt. Her voice hardened. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what your father would say? He stood from his chair. He's not here to say anything, and I know he wouldn't have had a problem. She ignored that. Your late father worked his whole life to build this company. He wanted you to marry someone at your level, someone who understands the weight of our name, someone who won't drag us into the mud. Samuel's voice was calm but cold. Grace isn't dragging anything. She's the most honest person I've ever known. She's poor, his mother snapped. She's nothing like us. She's real, he said, more firmly now. And she treats me like a man, not a brand. And most importantly, she has a very kind heart. His mother folded her arms. You're letting emotions blind you. You have a duty to this family, to this company. Samuel looked at her for a long, hard moment. No, Mom. I had a duty, but I've spent my whole life trying to be what you and Dad wanted. I'm done pretending. She narrowed her eyes. What are you saying? He stepped away from his desk. I'm saying I'm leaving. The company, the image, all of it. Her mouth dropped slightly. You're resigning. Yes. His voice didn't shake. He walked to the window, then back again. I want a life that's mine. I want to build something that feels like me. And if that means walking away from all of this. He looked around the large, cold office. Then so be it. His mother stood silent, shocked, angry, but he didn't wait for her to respond. He picked up his phone, typed a message to the board, then turned to face her one last time. "I'm choosing freedom," he said, "and I'm choosing Grace." Then he walked out of the office, leaving behind the world that had always tried to control him. The news spread quickly. Samuel Stone resigns from Stoneway Group. Grace read the headline on her phone screen, her fingers frozen in place. Her heart beat faster. She read it again, just to be sure. It wasn't a rumor. It was real. She sat down slowly on the bench outside the bakery. The sun was still climbing, but her thoughts were far from the morning rush. He left. Was it because of her? Her chest tightened. She wanted to feel happy, to feel proud. But instead a wave of doubt filled her. Did he make the right choice? What if he regretted it later? What if she wasn't worth the risk? Inside the bakery, Mama Grace was packing bread loaves when she noticed her daughter's quiet face through the window. Later that night, as they sat together on the edge of the bed, Grace finally spoke. "Mama, he gave it all up. Everything he worked for. And I think it's because of me." Her mother looked at her gently. "And that scares you?" Grace nodded slowly. "What if I'm the mistake?" Mama Grace smiled and took her hand. "My daughter, true love is not easy. It doesn't always come wearing fine clothes or speaking perfect words. Sometimes it comes scared, sometimes it comes messy. But when it comes, you don't let it go." Grace wiped a quiet tear. Her mother continued. "If he sees something in you that made him walk away from power, maybe you should see it too." Grace rested her head on her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes. "I want to believe it's real," she whispered. "Then believe," Mama said, "and stand by him." The next morning, the bell above the bakery door rang. Samuel walked in. He looked different, simpler, lighter, like a man who had let go of something heavy. Grace was at the counter, rolling dough with flour on her hands. She looked up and saw him. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She simply smiled. "You're back," she said softly. He nodded. "I needed to see you." She came out from behind the counter, wiping her hands. "How do you feel?" He shrugged. "Free." They both chuckled lightly, the silence between them now full of new meaning. "I've been thinking," Samuel said. "There's this land I've had for a while. I was going to build a boutique hotel there." Grace raised her eyebrows. "Okay." He stepped closer. "But I want more than that now. I want something we build." She blinked. "I want to help you open your own bakery. Your dream with your name on it." Grace stared at him, unsure of what to say. "I know it's a big step," he added, "and I won't push you. But if you're ready, I'm all in." She took a deep breath, heart pounding. "It's a lot, Samuel." "I know." She looked into his eyes, the same eyes that once begged for a bus ride, now full of purpose, of peace. And slowly, she smiled. "Let's take the chance." The air felt different now, not because of money, not because of business, but because Samuel and Grace were building something that truly belonged to them. They started the project a few days later. Samuel brought a large sketch pad and a box of colored pencils. Grace laughed when she saw it. "You're serious about this?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. He grinned. "Completely." They sat by the window at the back of the bakery. The sun poured in softly. Grace leaned over the pad while Samuel drew simple lines. "I thought you were some fancy businessman," she teased. "You draw like a 6-year-old." He laughed. "I didn't say I was an architect. I just know how to bring ideas to life." Grace shook her head but smiled. "Well, I want wide windows, wooden chairs, and the smell of fresh bread everywhere." "Noted," he said, writing it down carefully. "And your name on the sign outside?" She hesitated. "Maybe, someday." Samuel looked at her gently. "Someday is coming faster than you think." As the days turned to weeks, they met almost every afternoon. They visited the land together, flat, dry, open. Nothing was built yet, but in their minds, they could already see it. "There," Grace pointed one day. "That's where the counter should be. And here," Samuel added, "will be the oven wall, hidden, but close enough for people to smell everything fresh." She looked at him, surprised. "You really listen?" He shrugged. "You really matter." And that was how it went. No rush, no big declarations, Just simple moments, shared ideas, honest laughter, little arguments over flower color and table height. But beneath those small things, something bigger was growing. Grace saw a new side of Samuel. He wasn't the man in the suit anymore. He was patient, calm, sometimes silly. He talked more, he smiled more, and he looked at her like she was the only person that mattered. One evening, as they sat on the unfinished foundation, eating roasted corn and laughing about nothing, Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke, but in the quiet their hearts did. She didn't say it yet, and neither did he. But they both felt it. Love was no longer something they were walking toward. They were already in it. The world didn't stop moving after Samuel walked away from his title. The calls kept coming. Messages from investors, emails from board members, old friends asking, "When are you coming back?" But Samuel didn't answer most of them. He had made his choice, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't confused or burdened by it. He spent his days at the construction site with Grace, helping mix ideas with cement. He spent his evenings at the bakery, watching her knead dough while humming softly. He slept peacefully at night, something that hadn't happened in years. His clothes were simpler now. His phone rang less, but his smile was wider. And slowly, even Mrs. Stone noticed. At first, she didn't understand. Her son, who once sat on magazine covers and led boardroom meetings, now spent his time choosing curtain colors and bakery tile designs. She watched him from afar. He didn't look lost. He looked free. She remembered how quiet and tense he used to be, how heavy his eyes were behind every award photo. But now, those eyes had softened. One afternoon, she made a decision. Grace was closing up the bakery early that day. There was dust in the air from nearby construction, and she wanted to mop before tomorrow's delivery. The door opened softly behind her. She turned, expecting a customer. But it was Samuel's mother. Grace froze. Mrs. Stone stood at the entrance, elegant as always. But there was no coldness in her eyes today, only something gentler, something quieter. "Good afternoon," she said. "Good afternoon, Ma." Grace replied, her voice low. "I hope it's all right that I came." Grace wiped her hands and nodded slowly. "Yes, Ma. Please sit." But Mrs. Stone didn't sit. She stepped closer, then paused, uncertain for the first time. "I fought against you," she began softly. "I told my son you weren't right for him, that his father would have wanted better, that he deserves better." Grace's heart beat faster, but she stayed still. "I watched Samuel chase money and power for years. He won everything, except peace." She looked around the bakery, at the shelves filled with simple bread and humble care. Then she met Grace's eyes. "But now I see it. I see how he laughs, how he speaks like himself again." Grace didn't know what to say. Mrs. Stone stepped forward and gently reached for Grace's hand. "I was wrong." Her voice trembled just a little. "You gave my son peace, and that's something no wealth can buy." Tears quietly welled in Grace's eyes. She nodded once. "Thank you, Ma." For a long moment they just stood there. No more judgment, no more fear. Just two women, one letting go of pride, the other holding on to grace. And in that moment, something healed. Days passed after Mrs. Stone's visit, and for a while everything felt quiet and beautiful. The bakery's construction was moving fast, and Grace and Samuel had settled into something soft, steady, and full of hope. But peace rarely comes without interruption. One evening, as Grace was washing dishes in the back room of the bakery, her phone rang. She wiped her hands quickly and answered without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a familiar voice. "Grace, it's me, David." Her stomach turned instantly. "What do you want?" she asked sharply. I heard about you," he said, his voice trying to sound smooth. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should talk. You know, catch up." Grace swallowed hard. The memories returned, painful ones, words that cut, lies that broke her, the loneliness that followed. "There's nothing to catch up on," she replied, trying to stay calm. "Come on," David said, pushing. "Don't be like that. I was your first. That still means something, doesn't it?" She hung up. That night, she sat beside Samuel on the steps of the unfinished bakery. He noticed she was quieter than usual. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then finally spoke. "My ex called. David." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't expect it to shake me, but it did."
He wasn't just a mistake. He was toxic. He made me feel like I was never enough, and he didn't even hide it. He cheated, lied, and then tried to blame me for everything. Samuel didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out and gently took her hand. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. She leaned into him a little. "He doesn't get to ruin this, right?" Samuel looked her in the eyes. "Not while I'm here." The next day, Samuel made a few quiet calls. He didn't like secrets, and he hated danger. He asked a friend to check into David's recent past, not to stir trouble, but to protect the peace Grace had worked so hard to find. By evening, the information came back. David's last relationship? Over. Because of abuse. Emotional and physical. Samuel's jaw tightened as he read through the details. His hands clenched slowly, but his mind stayed calm. He knew what he had to do. 2 days later, Samuel met David face to face. They stood in the corner of a quiet parking lot near the local shopping plaza. David leaned against his old car, cocky smile on his face. "So you're the new guy?" Samuel didn't smile back. "I know what you did to Grace," he said quietly, "and I know who you really are." David scoffed. "What, you think money makes you her bodyguard?" "No," Samuel said, "but love makes me her protector, and I'm telling you now, stay away." David tried to laugh it off, but something in Samuel's voice and his calm warning made him step back. "If you call her again," Samuel said, "I won't just talk next time." David's smile faded. He turned and got into his car. Samuel watched until he drove off. Then he took a deep breath, walked back to his car, and drove to the bakery. The next few days passed quietly. David was gone for good, and she was finally free and happy. But something stayed on Grace's mind. She kept thinking about Mrs. Stone, the way she had walked into the bakery with soft eyes and honest words, the apology, the peace offering. She had seen something else in her too. Worry, not just about Samuel, but about the company he left behind. One afternoon, as Samuel helped carry a sack of flour into the back kitchen, Grace finally said it. "You should go back." He paused mid-step. "Back to the company," she said gently. "You built it. You know it better than anyone. Your mother. She's not fighting us anymore. She sees what we have." Samuel set the flour down and wiped his hands. His face was calm but guarded. "I'm happy here," he said. "I don't miss the suits or the boardrooms." "I know," Grace nodded, "and I love who you are now. But maybe it's not about choosing one life over the other. Maybe it's about balance, and maybe they need you." He stayed quiet. Grace stepped closer. "You're not going back for them. You're going back because you've changed, and that company could be better with the man you are now." Samuel looked into her eyes for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I'll think about it." 2 days later, Samuel visited his mother. They sat in the same bright sitting room where so many hard words had been exchanged in the past. But today, it was different. Mrs. Stone poured tea with a quiet hand. Samuel watched her closely. "I spoke with Grace," she finally said. "She's strong, soft but strong." Samuel nodded. "She's everything I didn't know I needed." Mrs. Stone looked up. "I was wrong to try and shape your life. I did it out of fear. I didn't want to lose you to someone I didn't understand." He leaned back, folding his arms gently. "You never lost me, Mom. You just didn't see me." She nodded slowly. "I see you now." They talked for over an hour, not just about the past, but about the future. That evening the sky turned golden orange as the sun dipped low over the water. Samuel had planned a simple dinner by the ocean. Just a table, a few candles, and the sound of the waves brushing gently against the sand. Grace wore a soft, flowing dress. Her hair was tied back. She smiled shyly when she saw the setup. "You did this?" she asked, walking toward him. He nodded. "I wanted you to see what life could look like when it's just us." They sat, talked, and laughed as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. Then, just as the stars began to peek through the sky, Samuel stood and reached into his pocket. He knelt in the sand, one knee, steady eyes. "Grace," he said, his voice low and full of emotion, "do you see yourself with me in 10 years? In 20? In 50? She blinked, her eyes already filling. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Yes, I do." He smiled, wider than he had in years, and opened the small box. The ring sparkled softly under the starlight. Grace didn't even wait. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. Yes, it wasn't long after the proposal. Samuel had smiled gently as they sat watching the waves that night. "I don't want to wait too long," he had said. "We've already found each other, that's the hard part." Grace had nodded, tears still in her eyes. "So what are we waiting for?" And just like that, plans began. No stress, no huge guest list, no gold-trimmed invitation cards. Just love, and two families coming together. The wedding took place by the sea, at the very same spot where Samuel had proposed. A soft breeze danced over the water. The sky was clear, calm, and touched with gold. A few chairs were set up on the sand. White flowers lined the simple aisle. Nothing too loud, nothing too much, just perfect in its simplicity. The guests rose slowly as the music began. Everyone turned toward the narrow path leading from the trees. And there she was. Grace, in a flowing white gown that swayed with the breeze.
Her smile was soft, her steps steady. Her heart pounded in her chest, but not from fear, only from joy. She walked barefoot across the sand, holding a small bouquet of white and pale yellow flowers. And at the end of the aisle stood Samuel. His eyes never left her. He wore a simple suit, his hair brushed back, his face open and full of quiet pride. The way he looked at her said everything. As Grace came closer, her eyes flickered briefly to the side. Mama Grace stood near the front row, her hand resting gently on her chest, tears in her eyes. Beside her, Mrs. Stone smiled warmly, a rare softness settling on her proud face. Two mothers, two women from different worlds, both watching their children choose love. When Grace reached him, Samuel took her hand. "You look like the love of my life," he whispered. She smiled. "You look like home." They turned to the small gathering. The breeze carried the words of the officiant softly through the air. And when the time came to speak, neither of them needed long speeches. Samuel simply said, "I choose you, today, always." And Grace replied, "I choose you too," without fear, without doubt. They exchanged rings, simple, elegant bands. When the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride," Samuel leaned forward gently and Grace met him halfway. There was clapping, laughing, a few joyful tears, but above all there was peace. 2 lives, 1 promise. As they walked hand in hand down the aisle, Samuel leaned closer. "Ready to build our dream?" Grace nodded, her voice full of quiet joy. "Let's begin." 2 months later, the morning sunlight streamed gently through the wide glass windows. The smell of fresh bread, brewed coffee, and cinnamon filled the air. Grace's hands moved with confidence as she arranged cupcakes in the display case. Behind her, staff bustled around the warm, inviting space, her space. The new bakery and cafe was finally open. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. Wooden shelves, open windows, soft music playing in the background. Customers sat with smiles on their faces, plates full, hearts full. Grace looked up and smiled at the gold letters above the door. Grace's Place. And beside it, a smaller sign read, "In partnership with Stoneway Boutique Hotel." Next door, Samuel stood in the bright lobby of the boutique hotel, speaking softly with a guest. His suit was sharp, but his face was relaxed, calm, and proud. He now managed both the guest experience of the hotel and his position as head of Stoneway Group, having returned stronger, wiser, and with a heart finally at peace. He glanced out the glass wall toward the bakery and smiled. His wife was thriving. They had built this together. Later that afternoon, Grace stepped into the quiet corner of the hotel's rooftop garden. Samuel was already there, leaning on the rail, watching the breeze dance through the trees. She walked up beside him and nudged his arm gently. He looked over, smiling. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for believing in me." Samuel looked down at her, his eyes warm. "I always have, and thank you for paying my fare when no one else would." They both laughed softly, hearts full, hands intertwined. They stood there in silence, no words needed. Just the hum of the city below, the peace of the moment, the gentle truth between them. 2 strangers on a bus, now partners in life. A love story paid in full. And as they stared into each other's eyes, they both knew this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning. How would you rate Grace and Samuel's love story? Would you have done what Grace did that day at the bus stop? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below.
And don't forget to share this story with someone who still believes in true love. Even in the smallest acts,